I'm Charlotte Garnes. I am the executive director and founder of ReNforce. And I was born and raised here in Georgia in a small town called Lumber City, Georgia. I'm the youngest of seven. I went to Georgia Southern, graduated with a degree in criminal justice, and I minored in sociology. And fast forward, I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I worked on my master's and got a master's in counseling. Started a business and began to provide mental health and substance treatment services to individuals who look like me, Black and brown youth, who is constantly getting in trouble, and hired some individuals who began to do some unethical practices. And with that, I got charged, indicted, and sentenced to 60 months in a federal prison. Coming out of prison, I relocated back to Georgia because I knew the reentry process would be hard for me. And being that I had the support of my family, even while I was incarcerated, I knew that coming back here would be hard, but also I felt I had the support and the love that was needed to help me be successful with reentry. And from that, I worked in Savannah, Georgia as a WIOA, one-stop operator, and doing that work around workforce development for justice impacted individuals. And sadly enough, when the individuals who I was working for at the time found out about my conviction and my prison sentence, they terminated me. And so in that termination, I became motivated and inspired to start ReNforce, to provide workforce development to people like me who's just as impacted, trying to reintegrate, trying to do what's right, in the midst of being told no. ReNforce is a nonprofit, and what we do is we provide workforce development on a career-based career track for justice impacted individuals. And what I mean by that is specifically a lot of justice impacted individuals, we want careers. We just don't want jobs just to pass the time away. So we want the careers. So ReNforce provides that workforce development, that career readiness, those job seeking skills around careers to help individuals reintegrate, and not only reintegrate, but sustain those employment opportunities and those careers. We work with businesses. And organizations who are looking to include justice impacted individuals into the labor force, because I know there's a stigma around people like me. So for that, I want to work with businesses. I want to educate them. I want to erase that stigma and have the labor force and the workforce embrace those of us who are justice impacted as we reintegrate into society. We've just launched Redemption House, which is a supportive house for women, and we followed the model of Susan Burton out of California. And part of that mission for me was when I came home, if I was considered homeless, because if my sister had not allowed me to stay at her home, I would not have had a place to go. So as I do this work and I meet women from across the nation, we all have a similar story of coming out, being homeless, and not being able to get housing because of a conviction history. And so that's a part of the system that I want to change and that I want to erase for justice impacted women, to provide that supportive housing. Once someone receives a felony conviction, we as justice impacted individuals, we lose so many rights, and we are impacted by the system in so many ways. And one of those ways is within the state of Georgia, we lose the voting right. That's one of the bigger ones. We lose the voting rights. And once you're off paper, you do have the ability to get those voting rights reinstated. But also having that felony conviction, throughout the state and throughout the United States, you lose your gun rights. But also, on a bigger caveat of the felony conviction, the housing. The housing is one of the huge barriers and obstacles that we face, because a lot of the rental applications, a lot of the loan applications, they have that question on there. Have you ever been convicted of a felony, or have you ever served time in prison? Also, with the employment, I do understand and know that Georgia is a ban the box state, but that's also just on the public application. So, from the state and some of the county applications, they no longer ask that question. But once you pass that initial step of getting the interview, they then in turn ask you that question, which then in turn allows people who are just as impacted to begin working. And once they check that background, they're immediately terminated. Also, life insurance. A lot of people don't realize that when you're incarcerated, the state and or the federal prison, they have life insurance on you. But when you exit incarceration, it's hard for you to get life insurance. I'm struggling with that right now because of a conviction, a felony conviction. So coming out, I stayed at the halfway house for a couple of weeks until the housing component was yet verified and was was deemed appropriate, because when you exit out, you may have that mindset of, oh, I'm going to stay here, or I'm going to do this, but the federal government, the probation and or state government, they have to make sure that where you're staying is not causing you to reoffend and things like that. So I stayed with my sister, as I shared, and just beginning to unpack everything that took place within me, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually for those 46 months. And just having to reacclimate myself. When I went in 13, we had, smartphones, but not to this magnitude of smartphones. And getting out in 2017, I remember I got a day pass, because I was at the halfway house at the time. I got a day pass to go to Target. And that's when the bank cards or the debit cards had their chip. I did not know how to use that. And we're talking about someone who's master's level, who was working on a PhD at the time of incarceration. And I'm like, okay, I don't know how to use this debit card. And that was embarrassing for me. And the cashier, he was a young guy. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know how to use this. And he was like, I could tell he was baffled. And I said, and he was like, don't worry about it, I'll help you. And he came from behind the counter and he helped me. And that was just so overwhelming, because you don't think of those things when you get out. You don't associate the disconnect that people feel. When we exit incarceration, you don't get that. You don't feel that. You don't think. That is overwhelming, but it is. So for me, that in turn, in essence, that increased the fear. Because if I'm thinking, this is something I don't know how to do, what more don't I know how to do? We rank within the top 3 of people who are impacted by the system. That impaction can be incarcerated. I think we're one of the states, I think Wyoming or Wisconsin now house more incarcerated people than we do, but we're in that top 3. Probation and parole, we're number 1, if I'm not mistaken, with that. And little old CSRA, the CSRA region, people don't believe this, but when you look at people returning from incarceration, Fulton County ranks number 1 because we know a lot of people want to be in Atlanta. But the CSRA region, we're number 2. So right behind Fulton County sits this area. And when I look at the work that we're doing in this area, it's not enough. And I hear a lot of justice impacted individuals talk about, well, why should I vote? It doesn't matter. My voice doesn't count. And I'm like, your voice does count. And I even take it a step higher to say, do you realize that's one of the bigger liberties that you literally have to fight to get back? And to me, when you're fighting me just as hard to stop me from doing it, that's a red flag to me. So I then ask them, why do you think that they are fighting you? Why do you think that that takes place? And again, we're specifically talking about Georgia, a state that has more justice impacted individuals than some of the other states throughout the South. So when you look at that from a bigger perspective, justice impacted individuals in Georgia, why are they trying to stop us from going down to cast that vote? Because our vote carries the most weight. Pay attention around the election time who comes to talk to justice impacted individuals, who comes to talk to the Black and brown people, who comes to talk to the Black women, because our vote carries so much weight. When your rights are restored, some of the things that we are advocating for no longer become things to be advocated for because your rights are totally restored. Housing wouldn't be an issue. Employment, those basic necessities, employment wouldn't be an issue because your rights are thus restored as if you've never violated them in the first place. So when we talk about that, it's really educating individuals to understand what that looks like from a perspective of, why are you fighting me so hard not to make sure that happens? That number, 4 million people, that's more than some states have. That 4 million, that's a whole population of a state in some different parts of the country. So when we think about that, the ability for 4 million people to have their rights totally restored, and specifically, even delving a little deeper, we know mass incarceration impacts Black and brown individuals more so than anybody else. So when we're talking about 4 million Black and brown people, or a high percentage of that Black and brown individuals within the state of Georgia, we would become unstoppable. And maybe that's the fear. Please feel free to reach out to us, follow us on all social media platforms, and visit our website because we have some great upcoming events coming up, and we would love for you all to be a part of that.